Many of you will be familiar with how child marriage affects thousands of girls around the world. But how many of you are aware that this is happening to girls like me right here in the UK? I was married at the age of 16. I was able to leave my child marriage, but my sister Banaz had her life stolen by so-called honor killing. It all started with a shared traumatic experience. We found ourselves in child marriage that neither of us chose or wanted. In my family, there are 5 girls and 1 boy. And when my sisters and I were between the ages of 7 to 10, we each had to undergo FGM. We were told this was done to protect us from being promiscuous and to prevent us from dishonoring our family name. This notion of honor was introduced to us at a very young age. And growing up in the UK as Iraqi immigrants, balancing 2 very different cultures was at times difficult. In particular, for one of my sisters, Bakel. When she was a teenager, she started to challenge my father on his beliefs and their relationship broke down. She ran away a couple of times, and eventually social services got involved, and she was taken into care. But of all the social workers who came into our home, not one of them asked me if I was safe. After Bakel left, every trace of her disappeared overnight, as though she never existed. And the community reacted. They cast my family out, and they threatened to throw petrol bombs at our house. My father had lost his status in the community. So in a desperate attempt to regain this, when I was 15 and studying for my GCSEs, my father came to me and he started to talk about marriage. I laughed it off because I thought he was joking, and I didn't really understand the concept of marriage. But from that moment, my father changed. He became very cold towards me, and I felt like he didn't love me anymore. And so a couple of months later, when my sister Banaz was just 17, she had a child marriage to a man much older than her who she didn't know. Banaz dropped out of college, and she moved to Birmingham with her new husband. So I hardly saw of her. But when I did see her, I noticed she became low and she became quiet. She changed as a person. Then when I was 16, the conversation of marriage came up again. This time, my father said, "There's another man who wants to marry you." And being unaware of the consequences, being scared to say no again, I said to my father, "Do what makes you happy." And then it all happened so quickly. One day I was called to the living room by my father. He told me to sit down, pay my respects, and don't speak. I didn't really know how to behave because all my life my family had said, "Don't talk to boys and don't look at boys." Yet all of a sudden, they said, "Here is your husband." So I sat there listening to my father, my mother, and this man. They were just talking about me as though I was an item at an auction sale. I did as I was told, but for just a brief moment I looked up, and the first thing I noticed was that he was so old. He was losing his hair, and I remember thinking, God, he looks like an uncle. Now, I was supposed to have dressed up and really made an effort to meet my husband, but I thought to myself, maybe if I don't, he'll see me and he'll think, I don't want her. But it was too late. The deal had been done, and I was just given away to this man. So the wedding arrangement started, and we went shopping for jewelry and the wedding dress. And every shop that we walked into, my mother showed me expensive gold bangles and necklaces. But I wasn't into any of that. I was a teenager growing up in London, and I loved pop fashion. I looked up to the likes of Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. But of course, a big, frilly, covered up to the neck wedding dress and kitten heels were chosen for me. I found it so disgusting. I still do. So in the wedding shops, I tried to act like a brat, to show that I was a child. And I just wanted to complete my childhood, really, and focus on my education. But I knew deep down there was nothing I could do to stop this. And none of the shopkeepers questioned my age or said anything about how young I looked. When I look back now, I realize that instead of saying, I don't want to get married, I just kept trying to show that I wasn't going to be good at it. In the religious part of the ceremony, the imam didn't question my age, and he conducted the whole ceremony in Arabic. I was the only one who didn't speak Arabic, yet nobody told me what it all meant. I do recall, though, the one thing, that the community, the same community, who cast my family out and made threats to us, were now back into our lives, and they were celebrating our weddings. My father had gotten what he wanted. By marrying 2 of his daughters as child brides, he had regained his honor and status within the community. Next came the registry office, and I prayed inside that the registrar would notice that I was a 16-year-old. But the ceremony went ahead as normal. And on the day of the wedding party, I was told to pack my things. So as I started packing, I put my pop star posters with my things. I knew I wasn't allowed to, but it was my only way of holding on to my childhood. On that same day, a family friend came to me, and she told me that a white bedsheet would be placed in my things and that I must return it to my family. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I nodded respectfully and said yes. The wedding party was horrible. I was told to stand there and smile, but not too much, just enough for the hundreds of photos being taken of the newlywed couple. And after the wedding, we were sent off to a hotel. In the hotel, I sat on the bed, and this man who was now my husband was just talking at me. I didn't really understand anything he was saying. His vocabulary felt so grown up. He placed his hand on my hand and he tried to kiss me. And I flinched in fear, naively saying to him, "Can we please be friends?" But he snapped immediately and he threw everything outside directly at me. I grabbed a pillow to cover my face. He cursed at me, closed the door, and left the room. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom, still in my wedding dress, and it would be the first time I started to self-harm. The pain took me away from the miserable reality I was facing. He came back in the early hours of the morning, and he didn't notice my cuts because he had other priorities. We got in the car and he drove me back to my parents, and he said to them, "We're still not husband and wife. There is something wrong with her." My mother was horrified. She said, "The community will think you're not a virgin." I didn't understand any of the language and the conversation that was happening around me. I just sat there, desperate for my parents to see me. I just wanted them to help me. But it breaks my heart to say that in that moment, my mother explained to me what the white sheet was for, and I was sent away with my husband. I tried everything I could to prolong this. I made excuses, but nothing worked. About 6 days later, I returned the white sheet to my mother, and I felt a part of me dying. A few months later, when I was helping my mother cook, I noticed that the smell of cooking made me really sick, and she suggested that I might be pregnant. I was confused. How could I be pregnant? I didn't even know how pregnancy happened. And going up in a jean size and throwing up every morning hadn't even registered to me. I was living in a complete daze. But I went to the GP, and I had a pregnancy test, and it was confirmed that I was pregnant. My immediate reaction to the nurse was, "I don't want his baby, can you please take it away now?" To which she replied, "Well, maybe you should have thought about using contraception." The nurse knew that I was 16 and that I was married. My family were absolutely ecstatic at the thought of their first grandchild. They told me that having this baby would make me love my husband. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew the ugly truth in which had led to this pregnancy, and I couldn't bear a physical reminder of this for the rest of my life. So I had an abortion. See, I never accepted the marriage, and every time my husband would say he doesn't like something, I would try to use that to make him dislike me. Silly things like hoop earrings and high heels. These little acts of rebellion were all I had to make him not want me. I was so desperate for him to say, "I don't want you." After the abortion, I secretly took the pill. But his family would call me from Kurdistan, and they would pressure me into getting pregnant again. They would say there was something wrong with me. And under all this pressure, I found it so difficult to continue with my education, which really hurt because this was my only escape. All of my teachers knew that I was married, and they knew my age, yet none of them ever said anything about how this was affecting me and my education. A year into her marriage, Banaz moved back into London, and the four of us, me, her husband, my husband, and Banaz, moved in together. She started enrolling at my college, and we became closer than ever. It felt like the good times. Banaz was the only person who witnessed what I was going through in my marriage, not only because she was living with me, but because she too was going through the same in her marriage, and much worse. That following summer, Banaz decided she'd had enough. She left her abusive child marriage and she moved back in with my parents. She was becoming happy again, she was becoming herself. She'd met someone and she'd fallen in love. But in the eyes of the community, another one of my father's daughters was dishonoring the family name. And so the rumors started, and death threats were being made to both Banaz and her boyfriend's life. They started making reports to the police about these death threats. And my sister went to the police more than 5 times. On one occasion, she handed the police a handwritten note naming her harassers. In January 2006, Banaz disappeared. Men in my family and those named on the list immediately became suspects and they were arrested. And while the police were investigating, a safety alarm was placed into my home. But I bravely lied and I told my husband that it was CCTV. I knew fully well that he would hate this, but I saw this as my chance to get out. And I was right. For the first time, he was scared to be violent to me, fearing that he too would be arrested. So he gave in. He said he would divorce me, but on one condition, that I accept all the blame, because he wanted the community to know that I was a bad wife. Of course, I'd done nothing wrong, but I took the blame just so I could get out. For the 2 years that I was married, I asked desperately to be divorced, but both him and my parents would never allow it. And so many times when I felt like giving up on life, because I thought I'd be stuck in that marriage for the rest of my life, I was finally going to be free. 3 long months into Banaz's disappearance, the police found her body in Birmingham. My sister had been murdered for leaving her child marriage. When I turned 18, I finally got my divorce, and I arranged Banaz's funeral, all in the same month. My father, my uncle, and 3 other Kurdish men were tried and sentenced to life imprisonment for Banaz's murder. Losing my sister has been the worst thing that has ever happened to me. And yet, it somehow allowed me to get out of my marriage. None of this should have ever happened to either of us. And when I look back now, I'm absolutely outraged at the number of people who failed to protect us, the number of adults, social services, the GP, the registrar, the imam, the teachers, and the police. Today I'm showing up on behalf of my 16-year-old self, my sister Banaz, and any child who is at risk of child marriage. Childhood up to 18 should be a time to learn, to grow, and to pursue your dreams, not to be married and raped. Under the current law in England and Wales, child marriage at any age is not a crime. This means that children are not automatically protected from non-registered, cultural, religious, or child marriages which happen abroad. And a child can get married at the age of 16 and 17 with parental consent. And we know that amounts to parental coercion, as I've clearly demonstrated through my story. The onus should never be on the child to have to speak out in order to get protection from child marriage. It is all of our responsibilities to do something about this. Child marriage must become a crime. Thank you. Thank you.